Hey guys, I'm here today with Justin Court, who is a contestant on the new Netflix series Outlast. Hey Justin, thanks for being here with me, man.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, let's talk first off who you are and what you do. So, I know you're a jiu-jitsu black belt. Justin's come out here and taught some training out here at our barn dojo on a few occasions, and of course you're a survivalist.
Yes, sir.
So you've been taking classes, obviously here, but where else have you been training?
Not only here, but also trained with Craig Cottle or Nature Reliance. He's also a mentor of mine and also a fellow jiu-jitsu practitioner, also a judo black belt. But I'm fortunate to be very close to the two best schools as far as survival in the state of Kentucky.
Well, I appreciate that. This show is something new and unique as far as survival shows on. There's a lot of buzz in the industry right now. A lot of people are very interested in this and to see how this plays out. Is this the next Alone, or what is this? What kind of information are you able to share with us on the show and kind of how that works?
Sure. Yeah. So those of you that are familiar with Alone, it's very similar in the fact that it's the same concept. So you take contestants that go out in the wilderness. Obviously, alone. You are alone. You're by yourself. Oddly enough, the executive producer of this show, Outlast, started Alone on season 1 and season 2. So he was the creator of that.
Wow.
Grant Collar. And so he wanted to have the same concept, but instead of just individuals filming themselves out there surviving, from building your shelter to purifying your water to hunting, fishing, he wanted to have that same concept but with a team. And then also have a team of 4. And so 4 different teams, so a total of 16 people. So you kind of have the same idea, but mixing in, instead of just one person by themselves, let's have 2, 3, up to 4 people, and then all the nuances of that and the interpersonal relationships that you would develop, and how that all comes out to play. So that's kind of the basis of the show. Very similar to Alone, but with a team.
That's cool. So you really get that tribal mentality. Did you see that develop amongst each team? Their own kind of, everybody has that tribal identity, tribal mentality to it. Did that kind of flesh itself out in the short term once your show started? And also, are the survival skills legit that you're all doing? Are they feeding you Snicker bars off camera? How'd that work?
God, I wish they were. I tell you, it was one of the hardest things is to answer your question, that tribalism, that the competitiveness, also the leadership role, who's going to take charge, who understands the dichotomy of leadership. So all that comes into play, especially in a situation where you're thrown into the wilderness. Now I have to back up a step and say that while we were out there and you kind of formulate your team, or once you develop who's on your team, we had no resources of our own. I literally was dropped into the wilderness just with the clothes on our backs.
Oh, wow.
And so we had no access to any of our own personal belongings, no contact with anyone whatsoever other than ourselves and the team. Now, we could see other teams across the river or across the way from different camps. However, that inner workings and trying to keep that cohesive bond between the 4, because you want to stay as a team, because you have to finish as a team.
Oh,
so
wow.
let's just say if you and I are on a team, right, and we have another 3rd person and another 4th person, they might want to leave and go to another team. Well, then that just leaves you and I, and how strong are we as 2 versus 4? Or how crippling is it with maybe a 4th person that's not really pulling their weight, and they're kind of just, riding the coattails of the other 3. So it really becomes interesting to see how that develops as a whole, and I think that's what made this show so unique and so creative from the get-go. Is obviously we've seen Alone and how that is from now, I believe, going into season 10. So, but obviously people tune into that, so how this is going to develop into the sense of, all right, what's it like with a team, and how long is that going to last? Who will literally outlast the one team versus the other?
Wow. That's incredible. So you've got strategy, survival psychology, everything's at work here. That's tremendous, and that would be a heck of a challenge on top of just getting through the day-to-day and relying on the skills. Now you had mentioned going in with really nothing but the clothes on your back. So did they supply you with like knife and axe and the basic tools and necessities, or did you just have to improvise a lot of your gear?
So they did have resource package drops. So on day one, we had a resource drop that each team pretty much had the same thing. You had one knife, one hatchet, you had a tarp, and you had a first aid medical kit, one fire starting device, ferro rod, and some cups and paracord and some other little, essential items that you found out later that you needed. But for the most part, in my opinion, the resources were subpar. Like, we had a bow with a quiver and 6 arrows, but the bow had a 40-pound draw, and which is good for a teenager, and to be accurate enough and to be close enough to actually harvest an animal, you had to be a pretty skilled hunter, especially an archer. So, it could have been better. And in fact, I really can appreciate my gear, especially, not that I didn't before the show, but especially now, when you're limited to a knife that just doesn't hold a good edge and a subpar hatchet, or even your shelter, your tarp, it just makes you realize, okay, you have to develop on your skill set and how to adapt and improvise and obviously overcome what you're limited to as far as resources. And that just wasn't on day one. That was other things too throughout the show that will obviously
Nice.
you'll see.
Looking forward to that. I'm kind of curious, I guess, because when you've been coming to classes for years. So in the process of going through classes here at Nature Alliance and at other locations that you've trained at, how much did you find that you were able to rely upon the skills that you picked up in classes and apply them in that situation there? Were the classes truly beneficial in allowing you to overcome some stress that you were dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% relied on my training. There was things that I it's weird because as you come to class and as you develop a new skill set, you can kind of compartmentalize what it is that you're learning and where you'll need it. So I'll give you an example. Fire building out there in Alaska in the Tongass National Rainforest. It's a rainforest, so it's 90% of the time it's raining, and on top of that, everything's wet. So to actually get a fire going, and I'm not exaggerating, it would take about an hour up to an hour and a half to get a fire started.
Wow.
And that is definitely not a one-person job. So luckily, as a team, you can build upon that. So being in classes here, or even with Nature Alliance, a lot of times we work as a team. And I have to give a shout out to Tony Spencer, who I usually am a partner with. And so it's really interesting when you work with someone, you kind of know what they're good at, right? And he's good at certain things and I'm good at certain things. Even if he's maybe, let's just say he's better at something that I know that maybe I could probably do it better, or let me rephrase that I'm better at that he might be doing, but I know he's good enough to do it. Well, let's go ahead and let him do that task, such as build the fire, so I can go get firewood, or I can go get kindling, or I can go utilize my skill set somewhere else. That way, the initial goal to get the fire going so we can eat and cook on will be obtained quicker and faster. Some things too, like I know specifically in this class too, in survival training, just building a proper shelter. The location where I was at, without giving it away, and you'll see on the show, it wasn't the most ideal situation. So some people have a natural inclination to complain or whine or wish things were better. Like, hey, this is what we're dealt with. This is the cards we're dealt with. So let's just utilize what we have and figure it out. And it might take a little bit more work, but at the end of the day, we're going to build a shelter that you want to be comfortable in. So, and that's not always easy, but that, and then also things like cold water immersion, getting into an uncomfortable situation where it's just 100% mental. That can be challenging too in its own right. So while I was out there, I was tested on every level, emotionally, physically, spiritually, you name it. And thankfully, I was able to come out at the end as far as my training and everything that I prepared for, I ended up doing really well.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful and I'm happy that I took it serious and that I paid attention in class.
That's awesome. Now, you'd mentioned briefly your faith, and we were talking off camera, of course, about how important a role your faith played in this specific task. But I know in life in general, you've got a relationship with the Lord that you're always getting better at, just like we're getting better at survival and jiu-jitsu. It's an ongoing thing. Do you mind sharing about that a little bit and just talking, maybe give some highlights and like things you struggled with there and how, your prayer time or whatever the case may be, you were able to draw upon that strength from the Lord and, just unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. So being out there in Alaska, it's one of the most unforgiving places when you're thrown into a situation like I was. Now, I signed up for this. I volunteered for it. I was accepted. So I was grateful, and I always tried to keep my mind in a good place. Mm-hmm. Through suffering, it's the only thing that's going to get you through. And I think that when you're defeated mentally, it's because you're allowing things to overtake your mind. And so for me, I was explaining to you on the show, we had to wear microphones and we were mic'd up and we had to get checked first thing in the morning. The audio crew would come out and check our mics, and then by the end of the day they want to make sure our batteries were good for throughout the evening, and then the following day it was the same process every day. So for me, the first couple of weeks were pretty much the same, and then as it progressively got further and further into the show, the challenges, just the simple little things like cutting firewood, were physically so exhausting that it was just, for me to hang on, sometimes by the hour, I had to draw strength. So the audio part, one of the producers came to me and said, "Hey, we know that you're saying something. What is it you're saying? We can't really make out. It sounds like you're whispering." And I looked at him right and I said, "Man, I'm praying." Mm-hmm. I said, "Out here, you see us suffering. Obviously, you all have your lattes and come out here and meet us and do the production stuff behind the scenes. But they don't realize, once they are done wrapping for filming for the day, we're still out there suffering. We don't get the lattes. We have nothing to eat." So the microphone, whether it was audible or not, I didn't care. I wasn't praying for them to hear it or for it to be on TV. It was for me in my mind to stay sharp and to know that I can do all things through Christ. I can overcome these obstacles, and also just to be grateful. Even though I'm in this vast place that's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's Alaska, seeing salmon and seeing the otters and seeing bears and all this wildlife, but still I was just suffering. It was miserable. I couldn't enjoy it as if I was a tourist going to this place to see the whales and and to go fishing. It literally was day by day, sometimes hour by hour, not letting my mind play tricks on me. And so, for me, drawing strength from that and having that faith, and I don't consider myself religious. I do have a faith, I have a personal relationship, and when people ask about me, I'm open to tell them. So for me, it was eye-opening. There were things that I pushed past, and there was things that I overcame that I never thought I would be able to do. And so if it wasn't for my personal relationship with God, with Jesus, that, man, who knows? Yeah. And I probably wouldn't be on the show. But at the end of the day, I just had to tell myself, being grateful because of the situation. It could always be worse. And so, that got me through. That's day awesome. By day, hour by hour, night by night. So, and I drew on that, and even to this day, it's still, that never goes away. Right. When you're pushed to that point where, it's, I lost 25 pounds on that show. So starvation diet's no joke, but I told you too, our Lord and Savior, he fasted for 40 days, 40 nights, and what he went through was a lot worse than what I'm going through. So to put in perspective, I'm only at 40%, like David Goggins says, the 40% rule. Just when you think you're at your end, it's no, you're really not even halfway through. So, I'm grateful and thankful that I had the faith. I have the faith, and I had the faith then to still not just abandon it and rely on my own strength and my own understanding. It was was, for me, life-changing.
That's awesome. Did you suffer, having talked to, I've trained a lot of guys that went on alone, and I've got to spend a lot of time with guys that came back from alone. And PTSD was a issue. Did you find that you suffered any type of mental issues or any physical ailments after you got back from the show, short or long term?
Yes, both. That's something too I'm going to talk a little bit more about once the show does drop, which we're within that 48-hour range now. But to answer your question, yes, the physical part, I have before and after. It's like if you've ever seen those memes or those pictures, you see the front of the Christmas tree and the back of the Christmas tree, that's definitely appropriate in this case. But because I just looked like death. I looked like a recovering meth addict. I was so drawn up. I mean, you physically can see the picture. From the picture, you can physically see how much weight I had lost and how much I actually went through. And it's not just me. It was everyone. So for that long of a time to really be on a starvation diet, it's interesting what your body does. And I don't know the science behind it, and I probably couldn't articulate it enough to really just to break it down scientifically. But yeah, I had a mild eating disorder when I came back, because when your body goes into the starvation mode and ketosis and you have a caloric deficit, when you're able to come back and eat whatever you want, for me, it was hard to have self-control and overindulge. And then you do that, and then you get to the point where like, oh, I ate too much. Well, now I feel like crap. Well, and then so you're like, well, I still don't feel content. I need to eat more. And so it was just this ping pong battle between my mental and physical state, and overeating and developing almost like, I don't really consider myself like a depressed person or someone who even gives into that. But for me, it was, I felt myself going into a dark place, and I didn't like it. But it was weird because there was nothing I could, at that time, feel like I could do to control it. So I had to just get real honest with myself. And part of that was like going back to what we were just talking about. Like, all right, God, I'm here in this situation, and I know something's not right. But with that, and then also getting on the mat, spending more time, not having too much idle time to just get into snacks or whatever it be, whatever vice it is. I mean, for some people it's drinking, it's smoking, it's gambling, whatever it may be. And for me, it never had been food. But for this particular time in my life, it was, and it was really hard, and to the point where it made me sick. And then, having digestive issues and things that with my health physically that affected my mental health. So it was a very serious problem that I recognized early on, and thank God that I feel like I had the right people to kind of mentor me and talk about this and say, hey, look, here's what's going on. This is what you need to do. Because in another industry, in the horse racing industry, for instance, my father's a jockey, my brother's a jockey, and I grew up around the horse racing industry. A lot of jockeys, they'll reduce their weight, and sometimes they do it in a way that's not healthy. They become bulimic. Well, they will eat and then vomit up. So I never wanted to allow myself to get to that point, but I do know that is a that is a mental disorder to allow yourself to do that and think that that's normal. Let's go eat a big pile of spaghetti or a Subway sandwich, and then I've got to make weight, so I better puke it up. So not to get too vulgar, but yeah, it was something that I had never experienced, and realized that that there are people out there that suffer from this and they can't get a grasp on it. So for me, I feel like just being grounded in my faith and realizing that, I have to be honest with myself. I don't have to eat that whole package of Oreos because I'm not starving. But I feel like my body needs to do it. Now, the flip side of that is also I would eat and eat and eat, and then, I'm an avid competitor in jiu-jitsu, so like trying to get my weight back down to a normal range, it was tough because my body's just trying to hold on to every ounce, every calorie it can. So that messes with me and messed with me mentally, and to the point where I overtrained, and then I wasn't eating right, and it made me sick. And so you know, I kind of learn things the hard way sometimes, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely.
So it was a rough go.
Yeah.
And if I had to do it all over again, I would do it. I would just be a little bit smarter and how I would I'd be a little bit more tactful in my approach.
Okay. So I know coming off alone, as I said, I've been around a lot of guys, and they suffered with these exact same conditions that you're talking about. Some of them for months.
Yeah.
And about how long do you think that had an adverse effect on you? Any ballpark? Few months, maybe?
Yeah, I would say between 4 and 6 months.
Wow.
Because I remember at the 6-month marker, it was I started recognizing like, okay, I don't feel like I have to overindulge in everything that I eat. I would eat to the point where I would feel full, and then a little bit more, and then I would feel like I was like need to unbutton my pants, you know, like Al Bundy, you know, unbutton your pants sitting on the couch. Yeah, I realized that that's mental, so I don't have to do that, and that was probably one of the things that I had to work on, because I feel like I'm a mentally strong person for different reasons, and you know, but I do have my guilty pleasures and my vices, and one is, you know, like cookies, man. I love some cookies, you know, especially homemade ones. So that, yeah, roughly I'd say it didn't last much longer than that, 6 months. I felt like I had it wrapped up, but it was something that at first I didn't take serious, and I ignored it, thinking that it was just a phase, you know, coming off the show, being at a, you know, calorie deficit, and then trying to just put the weight back on.
Yeah. A lot of people don't take that into consideration, even when they go on alone. You know, it's a much shorter time span. Or not alone. Naked and Afraid. Let's pick on that. Naked and Afraid's a short-term show, but we see the bug bites that these people get out there. A lot of them are just not eating anything, so it's a 3-week forced fast, and maybe they do, or maybe they don't, give them a little snack here and there to keep them in the game a little longer. But the after effects of just being through that duration, last month some people get sick for years and have long-term medical effects. So I think that's something important for people to take into consideration, is their mental fortitude before they all apply to be on these survival-oriented programs.
Yes.
Especially as a contestant. A host, it's a whole different ball of wax, but as a contestant, you're submitting yourself not necessarily to trained survival experts. A lot of the people that are the survival experts, or the people behind the camera kind of guiding the ship for these programs, are former contestants from other shows. And they're not necessarily well trained at all. They're playing catch up, or they just said, well, I have this experience and this is what it is for me, so we can put them all through this and it'll work out. And a lot of it's for ratings, and it's still TV, right? So I think a lot of people need to keep that in mind. And that kind of leads me into the next question, is a lot of guys in our industry, survival and outdoor industry, are applying. I know dozens of people just vying to get on a loan, whatever they can get into, because they want that breakout role, or whatever the case may be. They just want to test themselves.
Sure.
What advice, if any, could you lend to those guys that are in that casting process, or thinking of engaging in the casting process? What did you find was helpful, not so helpful for you? Are there any tips that you can share in that regard?
Yeah, so again, back to kind of earlier conversation, is getting real honest with yourself. You know, everyone wants to think that they're better at something than they are, or there's nothing wrong with kind of foreseeing yourself as being something, or projecting that image in your mind of what you could be or what you want to do, if it's, you know, maybe winning the $1 million or becoming famous. For me, it was none of those. I'm a very competitive person by nature. If that's you, you're competitive, you really want to test your skills, I would say test yourself, if you haven't already, in other areas. You know, try doing a 3-day or a 5-day fast. And I mean, nothing but just water. That you'll get real honest with yourself about day 3. If you can do that 72-hour fast, then you know a little bit of what it's like. Not only that, put yourself in a situation where, you know, you have limited resources, such as just recently here in Kentucky, we had power outages and heavy wind damage, and people were without power, and people were freaking out, and they're panic buying generators.
Yeah.
I didn't panic. I knew that I was okay.
Right.
We lost power, but at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, if I can live in the wilderness, a little discomfort from my heater or not having heat, or the modern conveniences of hot coffee, I can deal with that. But if you're going through a process and you want to be on Alone, or if you want to be on some type of survival show, get real honest with yourself. Identify your weaknesses, because your strong points, you're going to know what you're good at, what you can be relatively decent at, even if you have a rudimentary understanding. For me, it was my plant identification and foraging and identifying medicinal edible plants was probably my weak point. So I knew that I was going to be in an area that if I could identify 3 to 5 plants that I could eat, that I could survive on, I'd be okay. So I think really, to answer the question, just getting honest with yourself, test yourself in areas on small little levels, hit some small goals, go take some classes, get uncomfortable, number one, and see how you fare. Because it's easy just like, oh, well, I can just draw myself to some form of comfort. You're not going to have that on these shows. If you want to win, you want to be successful, having the mental fortitude and the clarity to understand what you are capable of and what you're not. So knowing your limits. There's nothing wrong with pushing yourself, but at the same time, make sure that you are 1,000% committed, that you know that if you're going to be on a show like Alone, which I think they're going into season 11 now, or season I think it's going into 11, that following their rules, because their rules are not always what your rules are, or what you think the rules that you are used to. So being able to adapt and improvise, and also knowing that what you really are good at and how to be very successful at that. So you'll draw strength from that, and the process of the exposure of your weaknesses on TV. I know some people don't like that. You're going to have a camera in your face nonstop from the time that you wake up to the time you go to sleep. If you're not used to that, that takes some getting used to for some people. Some people just pretend like they're not even there, and that's not even a big deal. Having conversations like this with someone that maybe you just don't agree with, or you realize that what they're trying to do is manipulate. Because on the other side of the camera, it's easy to spin things and turn things and twist it. So you have to be comfortable with that. That's not what I meant. That's not what I said. Yeah, but it doesn't matter, because this is how they're going to portray you. And that could be good. It could be bad. I don't know. But
so basically, every word, every action's always being recorded.
Yes.
And it's all submitted for judgment, ultimately, to the editor or the producer to tell the story arc they want to tell for each character. And at any point during your process of just casting, and then once you actually made it on the show, were you playing a character, or were you just yourself the entire time? Because I know a lot of guys, they'll put on this big bravado and act like Rambo, then they get on the show and they're like, oh, I seen a bear, I need to leave. Or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
So how did you play that out?
Well, you'll see. But to answer your question, 100%, I'm my authentic self. What you see is what you get. Awesome. I get excited about certain things, and I can be ruthless, and I can be charming, and just put it this way, you would want me on your team. And so what you see is what you get. I try to be very level-headed. I try not to let my emotions dictate my actions. Just like when we're training out here, everything from tactical response courses to survival to emerging into cold water. Having that mentality of like, it could always be worse. So I'm thankful and I'm grateful that I'm here doing this, because I'm going to learn and acquire a skill set that, who knows, one day I'll probably use. And a few years ago, 2 years ago, when I came up for some of the classes, who later in life and being on the show, like, wow, here I am.
I'm really getting in a daggone body of water. What am I doing?
This is it, man. So this is, there's no, it's 100% authenticity. And that's one thing I like to correlate too with, you train jiu-jitsu too. So you can't can't fake being the level that you're at, right? You will be exposed. So like in jiu-jitsu, you know, if you put me in a choke and I don't have the right defenses set up, I'll either have to tap or you'll put me to sleep. And at the end of the day, we'll slap hands, fist bump, we're buddies, but you can't fake that, right? So if your offense is better than my defense, you're going to win. So for me, being if any character that I would go into, it was more or less just me like getting pumped about some of the tasks and some of the I don't want to say without giving it all away, but some of the challenges that we had to overcome. And so, you know, for me, I like a challenge, no matter what it may be. I don't care if it's build a fire in 10 minutes with limited resources, or take all day, you and your partner, build a shelter, you know, something like that in the survival world. So, yeah, I mean, I hope that they display that on the show, that, you know, me just being my authentic self.
Yeah, I'm excited, man.
And the ones that didn't, and they had that, you know, that bravado, that fake sense of being something that they're not, you'll see, because they didn't last.
Yeah. I'm very excited to see how this plays out, and the show airs, like you said, we're within the 48-hour window. Friday night,
Yes,
what is
sir.
that, March?
So March 10th, it
March
actually,
10th.
I had found out this morning from known sources that it will drop at 3:30 or 3 o'clock, 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're actually below the 48-hour window. Not that you probably want to wake up at 3 o'clock and put Netflix on. But, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm by no means am I perfect, but at the same time, I wanted to win, and I wanted to do everything that I could to achieve that goal. And I think the viewing audience will be happy with the outcome.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it, man. Thanks for being here, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Always good
Appreciate
to see
it,
you.
Jason.
Thanks a lot, guys, for watching us. Learn from this, because I know a lot of you are in the casting process for other shows. Take all the information Justin shared and apply it as it's useful. And check out Outlast on Netflix starting Friday.